Hey there, welcome back to my YouTube channel, and in this video I am going to discuss two important aspects which are again repeatedly asked in your examination. One is the gastric motility, another one is the gastric emptying. Okay, so let's understand as to what will be the learning objectives for this session. Let's just briefly understand again the electrical activity of the stomach, because this is important to understand the movements of the stomach. Then let's dive into the gastric emptying. And two very important concepts. One concept is that of the pyloric pump, and another concept is that of a phenomenon called as retropulsion. We will understand both of them, and then at last let's see what are the factors which help in regulation of the gastric emptying. So electrical activity of the stomach, there are two types of electrical activity that can be seen in the stomach. One is called as the slow waves. The slow waves are nothing but our basic electrical rhythm, and the second one is what is called as the spike potentials. So when we look into the graph, we see that this is how the graph looks like. These are the slow waves and these are the spike potentials. So these slow waves are nothing but these are slow undulating changes which are occurring in the resting membrane potential, and these are present even in the resting stage of the stomach. Whereas whenever there is a stimulation, the stimulation can occur because of the stretch, because of the release of the acetylcholine, or because of the parasympathetic stimulation. What is going to happen is these slow waves, the potential of these slow waves crosses minus 40 millivolts, that is, it becomes more positive, and when it becomes more positive, these slow waves, they get superimposed with the so-called spike potentials, and these spike potentials are nothing but the action potentials. So now remember that the slow waves, they are helping in the rhythmic contraction of the stomach, whereas it is the action potentials which are in turn helping in what is called as the tonic contraction of the stomach. So I have already made a video on the slow waves and the so-called the basic electrical rhythm. Please look into that video so that you can understand. The movements of the stomach are basically divided into two parts. One is the motility which is occurring on the empty stomach, which is called as the interdigestive period of the stomach, that is when there is no food present in the stomach. And herein we see two types of movements. One is called as the migrating motor complexes and the second one is called as the hunger contractions. And then there is motility related to the meal. That means whenever the person takes the food, that is during the digestion. Herein we see the first type of movement which is called as the receptive relaxation. The second is what is called as the mixing peristaltic waves, and the last one is the peristalsis, which is really helping in the gastric emptying. So let's understand these one by one. So first let's understand the migratory motor complexes which occur during the interdigestive phase, also called as MMCs. What are these? These are the cycles of modified motor activity, and these complexes or these waves, they are going to migrate from the stomach to the terminal ileum. Okay, so remember that migratory motor complexes are strictly occurring only during the interdigestive periods when almost there is no food present in the stomach. Okay, and this wave of migratory motor complex is going to travel at a rate of 5 centimeters per minute, and during this period, when we see the presence of the migratory motor complexes, there is an increase in the secretion. There is an increase in the gastric secretion, increase in the pancreatic secretion, as well as there is an increase in the biliary secretion. Okay, so why these migratory motor complexes have to be there? Because they are going to help in clearing the stomach of the luminal contents in preparation for the next meal. So there could be some residual food which could be present in the stomach. Even that residual food has to be cleared off. Okay, so the stomach is now completely ready for the next meal. So their main aim is they are going to clear the stomach of the luminal contents, and they are going to prepare the stomach for the next meal. And very important point to remember here is that the migratory motor complexes are abolished as soon as the food enters into the stomach. Okay, the next type of movements or the contractions of the stomach which is going to occur during the interdigestive phase is what is called as the hunger contractions. Okay, these are nothing but the peristaltic contractions which are occurring on an empty stomach, and they are going to increase in intensity over a period of time. So longer is the duration of the fasting, the intensity of the hunger contraction is going to increase, and then they are going to become extremely strong, leading to what is called as the tetanic contractions. Okay, and these contractions, they are going to involve the entire stomach. Okay, complete stomach is going to be involved, and they are also going to be very, very painful, which is going to last for a period of 2 to 3 minutes, and then again there is going to be an hunger contraction. And these painful contractions are what are called as the hunger pangs. So remember that there are two types of movements which are occurring on an empty stomach. One is called as the migratory motor complex, and the second one is called as the hunger contractions. Now next, let's understand the movements which are occurring when the food is about to enter into the stomach or has entered into the stomach. So the first one of these is what is called as the receptive relaxation. So as the name itself is suggesting, this is relaxation of the upper part of the stomach, basically the fundus and the body, upper part of the body of the stomach, so as to receive the bolus of the food from the esophagus. So when the food is entering or is about to enter into the stomach, the upper part of the stomach is going to relax. This is what is called as the receptive relaxation, so that it is going to receive the food into the stomach. Fine. So what does it help in? It helps in accommodating the food very easily. Even though there is a receptive relaxation, that is, the stomach is going to expand and there is going to be a relaxation, there will be no rise in the intragastric pressure. A very important point which you must write in your exams. Okay, and how it is mediated? It's a vagovagal reflex, and it is going to occur because of release of these two important compounds. One is called as vasoactive intestinal peptide, and another one is the nitric oxide. Next, there is a very interesting movement which occurs in the stomach, which is called as the mixing peristaltic waves. Okay, remember that these waves, they are initiated by the so-called slow waves, or just now I told these are also called as the basic electrical rhythm. So what are these mixing peristaltic waves? These are weak peristaltic constrictor waves which begin in the mid portion of the stomach. And once they begin in the mid portion of the stomach, they are going to move towards the antrum for every 15 to 20 seconds. So they are beginning in the middle portion of the stomach, and then they are moving towards the antrum for every 15 to 20 seconds. Now as they are progressing from the middle part of the stomach towards the antrum of the stomach, their intensity is going to increase, and then they are going to form what is called as the constrictor rings. So these mixing peristaltic waves, which are very weak peristaltic constrictor waves, which are also simply referred to as the mixing waves, their main role is that they help in mixing the food with the gastric secretion. And when food mixes with the gastric secretion, it results in the formation of the chyme. So remember that mixing peristaltic waves' most important function is that they help in mixing the food with the gastric secretion. Now next come to the last movement which is occurring when the food is present in the stomach, and that is called as the peristalsis. Now how this peristalsis, as I am telling you now, is different from the mixed peristaltic waves which we have seen in the previous slide. So what happens is, most of the time, as I have just told you regarding the mixed peristaltic waves, most of the time these peristaltic waves, they are very weak. Okay, and they are going to help in mixing of the food. However, about 20% of the time, these contractions or this peristaltic constrictor ring which I had told you, it becomes very intense, beginning in the middle part of the stomach and spreading towards the distal part of the stomach. Okay, so these ring-like intense peristaltic contractions, they are going to cause stomach emptying. They are going to cause stomach emptying. See, here you are seeing in this first diagram, see, there is a ring of constriction which is occurring in the middle part of the stomach, and here you can see that the food is present in the distal part of the stomach. And in the next diagram, we can see that this ring of constriction has now progressed to the pyloric part of the stomach. Okay, pyloric part of the stomach. Now one more interesting thing which we have to understand here is that the distalmost end of the stomach, this portion is what is called as the pyloric sphincter. Okay, and this pyloric sphincter is always tonically constricted. It is always tonically constricted. That means the pyloric sphincter, even though it is tonically constricted, it is going to allow water and fluids to empty from the stomach. But it is going to prevent the passage of the food particles until they have mixed very well with the chyme to almost a fluid-like consistency. You are understanding this point? The pyloric sphincter is always tonically constricted. It is not going to allow the food particles to pass through it, but it is only going to allow the water and the fluid material to empty from the stomach into the duodenum. But it is also going to allow the food particles when the food particles are mixed very well with the chyme to almost fluid-like consistency. Now, as I am telling you, it is not going to allow these food particles. So what is going to happen is, these food particles, because of this intense peristaltic constriction, they are going to come and hit on this closed pyloric sphincter. Now, the wave of peristaltic contraction is so intense and so strong, when these food particles hit this closed pyloric sphincter, these food particles are now going to bounce back towards the proximal part of the stomach. This bouncing back of the food particles back to the proximal part of the stomach or back to the middle part of the stomach is what is called as retropulsion. And remember that this retropulsion keeps on occurring for so many times. It keeps on occurring for so many times that the chyme which is present in the stomach, it gets converted into a fluid-like consistency. So once the chyme becomes fluid-like consistency, then the chyme is pumped a bit by bit at a time into the small intestine. So this pumping of the chyme bit by bit at a time into the small intestine is what is called as pyloric pump. So for this pyloric pump to operate, what I require? I require the retropulsion. For retropulsion to occur, what I require? I require a functioning pyloric sphincter which is tonically constricted and a strong wave of peristalsis which is initiated somewhere in the middle part of the stomach, and it is moving towards the antral part of the stomach or towards the pyloric part of the stomach. So this is going to cause the food which is present in the stomach to go and hit the closed pyloric sphincter, and the food is again going to bounce back towards the middle part of the stomach. This is what is called as the retropulsion. This retropulsion keeps on occurring until and unless the chyme is got converted into a fluid-like consistency. Now, once the chyme has got converted into fluid-like consistency, this chyme will be allowed by the pyloric sphincter a bit by bit into the small intestine, and this is what is called as the pyloric pump. So this peristalsis which is occurring, it is helping to empty the contents of the stomach into the duodenum. Okay, so that means peristalsis as such is having two functions. One is, it is also helping in mixing the food particles with the gastric secretions, resulting in the formation of the chyme. Second is, peristalsis is also helping in moving the food from the stomach into the duodenum. Because of these two important phenomenon, one is called as retropulsion and another one is called as the pyloric pump. So this is with respect to the movements of the stomach. Next, let's understand the gastric emptying and what are the factors which affect the gastric emptying. So the factors are basically two factors. One is a gastric factor, another one is a duodenal factor. So the gastric factors which affect the gastric emptying is, the first and foremost is the gastric food volume. More is the volume of the food, more is the emptying. So whenever there is more volume of the food, there is more stretching of the stomach. Whenever there is more stretching of the stomach, there is going to be stimulation of myenteric reflex. Remember, there are plexus of nerves which are present in the stomach, which is called as a myenteric plexus, and this stimulation of the myenteric plexus is going to enhance the activity of the pyloric pump. This is one factor. And the second factor which affects the gastric emptying is the type of food which is present in the stomach. If it's predominantly a carbohydrate food, then the emptying is going to be faster. If it's a protein food, then the emptying is going to be slower. But if it is a fatty food, then the emptying is going to be the slowest. So these are the two important gastric factors. Now coming to the duodenal factors, remember that the duodenal factors are going to inhibit the gastric emptying. How do they inhibit the gastric emptying? by initiation of an inhibitory reflex, a very important reflex which is called as the enterogastric reflex. And remember that this enterogastric reflex is mediated via the enteric nervous system, via the extrinsic nerves, as well as via the vagus. So what are all the factors which are going to stimulate the enterogastric reflex? Remember, stimulation of the enterogastric reflex means what? Inhibition of the gastric emptying. So the first and foremost factor which stimulates the enterogastric reflex is the volume of the chyme. More is the volume of the chyme, more is the distension of the duodenum, more is the distension of the duodenum. Now that is going to cause stimulation of the enterogastric reflex, and less will be the gastric emptying. Second way is irritation of the duodenal mucosa. Some irritants have come into the duodenum. Now these irritants are again going to cause stimulation of the enterogastric reflex, and then they are going to cause inhibition of the gastric emptying. Acidic chyme, whenever the pH of the chyme is less than 3.5 to 4, even that is going to cause stimulation of the enterogastric reflex, and that is again going to inhibit the gastric emptying. Hyperosmolar chyme, a chyme with more osmolarity, if it has entered into the duodenum, again there is going to be stimulation of the enterogastric reflex, which is going to inhibit the gastric emptying. And last but not the least is the protein breakdown products. More amount of protein has entered into the duodenum. Even this is going to cause the stimulation of the enterogastric reflex and hence inhibit the gastric emptying. So all these are the factors which are indirectly going to inhibit the gastric emptying via the stimulation of a reflex which is called as enterogastric reflex. Now there are also some hormonal factors which can inhibit the gastric emptying, and for all these hormonal factors the stimulus is the fats which are entering into the duodenum. So I have told you, whenever fat enters into the duodenum, it is going to cause an inhibition of the gastric emptying. So whenever fat enters into the duodenum, there is secretion of some hormones, and the most important of these is what is called as cholecystokinin, and this is going to cause inhibition of the gastric emptying. There are few more hormones which are produced whenever fat enters into the duodenum. Another one is secretin, the gastric inhibitory peptide, and the glucose dependent insulotropic substance. See, remember, all these hormones are produced because of the entry of fat into the duodenum, and these hormones are going to inhibit the gastric emptying. So these are all the factors which are going to cause inhibition of the gastric emptying. So in this video, what we have studied, we have started with a brief introduction of the electrical activity of the stomach, wherein we studied that there are two types of electrical activity. One is called as the slow waves, which is also called as the basic electrical rhythm, and the second one is what is called as the spike potentials. Remember, the spike potentials are the real action potentials. Then we studied the movements of the stomach, and we classified the movements of the stomach into two types. The one which is occurring during fasting or during the interdigestive phase. Okay, interdigestive phase. Second is the one which is occurring during the digestive phase or when the food is present in the stomach. So during the interdigestive phase, we saw two types of movements. One is called as the migratory motor complex, and the second one is called as the hunger contractions. And during the digestive period, the first one is the receptive relaxation. This is going to occur when the food is about to enter into the stomach. The second one is what is called as the mixing peristaltic waves. Okay, the mixing peristaltic waves. And the last one we studied is the peristalsis, which is going to cause the gastric emptying. And in the peristalsis, here we have studied two very important concepts. One is called as retropulsion and the pyloric pump. And we concluded the video by studying the factors which regulate gastric emptying. Again, here there are two factors. you have the gastric factors and you have the duodenal factors. And in the duodenal factors, these are usually going to inhibit the gastric emptying. We studied one important reflex which is called as enterogastric reflex, and what are the factors which stimulate this enterogastric reflex. And the second thing we studied is whenever fat enters into the duodenum, more amount of fat enters into the duodenum, this leads to secretion of some hormones, and these hormones are going to again inhibit the gastric emptying. Thank you for listening to this video. If this video is helpful for you in your exams, do like, do share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you.